Let's have a discussion about what lenses you should buy. Wagwan guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Osborne Chin, a wedding, portrait and lifestyle photographer based in Jamaica. In my last video I mentioned some things to consider when buying a camera. Today I want to take that a step further by discussing what to consider when buying lenses. Now let's face it, with the hundreds of options out there, it can be overwhelming when trying to find the right lenses for you. In any kind of photography or videography, choosing the right lens is crucial for achieving the perfect shot. Now let's dispel the notion that there is one best lens. There is no such thing. There are many great lenses which come in a wide variety of sizes and shapes and features. No single lens works for everyone. Everyone has their own unique needs, so what works for me may not necessarily work for you. When you're looking to buy a lens, you must first know what you'll be shooting. You must know what features you're looking for, and you must know your budget. So assuming that you already have a lens, most likely the kit lens, the first question you have to ask yourself is, what am I looking for that my current setup cannot provide? Most likely, you will come up with either of two responses. One, your current lens is limited in its focal range, meaning it's either not wide enough or long enough. Or two, your current lens is not fast enough, meaning that the aperture isn't wide enough or not able to open wide enough to allow you to shoot in darker situations or use faster shutter speeds. Let's discuss the main factors you need to consider to help you narrow down your choice of lens. The first thing you have to consider is the type of lens. There are two main types of lenses. You have prime lenses and you have zoom lenses. Prime lenses are fixed in their focal lengths. This simply means they do not zoom, so they only give you one field of view. If you want a different field of view, you either have to move closer or farther away, or use a different lens. Prime lenses are offered in a wide variety of focal lengths ranging from 14mm on the wide end to 600mm on the long end. Primes are generally smaller, lighter, and have better optical quality than zooms. They also tend to produce sharper images and have wider apertures than zoom lenses, apertures as low as f1.2 or even f1.0. Wow. Most primes are cheaper than zooms due to their simpler construction, although there are some primes that are very expensive and very heavy. A zoom lens, on the other hand, is a lens with a variable focal length. I will talk more about focal length later on. Now, zoom lenses do what the name suggests. They zoom. They are powerful, versatile, and convenient as they cover a wide variety of different focal lengths. This is something that can be vital to some shooters who require speed and can't afford to keep swapping out different lenses. Zoom lenses can serve multiple purposes, from landscapes to portraiture to sports and weddings, depending on the zoom range, of course. Zoom lenses tend to be larger, heavier, and are generally more expensive than prime lenses. However, they sometimes sacrifice on quality for convenience. They also do not have the wide apertures like prime lenses. They tend to have a max aperture of around f2.8, but there are a few cases where they have apertures as wide as f2 and f1.8. So for example, the new RF Canon 28-70 f2 or the Sigma 18-35 f1.8. The next factor to consider when buying lenses is the focal length. The focal length of a lens determines more or less its utility and purpose. The focal length is the physical distance measured in millimeters from the point of convergence in the lens to the sensor when the subject is in focus, or when the lens is focused at infinity. The longer the focal length, like 200mm, the narrower or smaller the angle of view, and the higher the magnification, or the more zoomed in. The shorter the focal length, like 16mm, the wider the angle of view and the lower the magnification. Focal lengths can be divided into different categories, ranging from ultra-wide to super telephoto. Ultra-wide angle lenses range anywhere between 8mm, like fisheye lenses, and 24mm. These lenses offer an extremely wide angle of view and most times produces heavy distortion due to their spherical perspective. These lenses are usually suited for wide landscapes, interior and architecture, and even cityscapes. Wide-angle lenses range from 24 to about 35 millimeters and produce less distortion than ultra-wide angle lenses. Another way to look at it is any focal length that is shorter than the length of the sensor measured diagonally is considered wide. So for a full frame 35 millimeter sensor, a wide angle would be anything below 35 millimeters, and for a crop sensor, anything below 24 millimeters. Wide angle lenses are also used for landscapes, but can also be used for things like environmental portraits, street photography, events, large groups of people, and a wide variety of other types of photography. Pun intended. Now, the standard focal length ranges between 35 millimeters and 75 millimeters. These are called standard because they generally represent the standard perspective of the human eye. The images are captured as you see it. These focal lengths are extremely popular among most photographers and are generally considered to be the most versatile. So for example, the 35mm and the 50mm prime lenses, and also the 24 to 70mm zoom lens. Next up is the short to medium telephoto that typically has a range of between 80mm and 105mm. These focal lengths are ideal for portraits as they provide the most flattering perspective of the human face without causing any distortion or compression. Telephoto lenses generally range anywhere between 135mm and 300mm and are ideal for shooting distant subjects and distant scenes. These are also popular for portraits, weddings, wildlife, and sports, as they tend to create maximum background separation and compression. Lastly is the super telephoto range that is generally between 300mm and 800mm, and even higher if you use teleconverters. These are the main tools of choice for professional sports and wildlife photographers. If you watch any major sporting event like the Olympics or the World Cup or National Geographic, you will see these extremely large, usually white lenses being used by these photographers. The third major factor to consider when buying a lens is the sensor type or the sensor size of the camera you'll be using the lens on. Cameras either have a full frame sensor or a cropped sensor. The type that you have will make a big difference in how you should go about choosing your lenses. There are some lenses that are specifically designed for cameras with certain sensor types. Lenses designed for crop sensor cameras have a smaller rear lens opening, which produces a smaller image circle than that of lenses designed for full frame sensors. This is because the image being projected has to cover the entire sensor in order to maximize on the optical qualities of the lens. Generally speaking, you can use full frame lenses on crop sensor cameras, but you cannot use crop sensor lenses on full frame bodies. In some cases you can, but in these cases you will get heavy vignetting around the corners of the frame because the image circle on a crop sensor lens is not big enough to cover the entire full frame sensor. On the flip side, if you use a full frame lens on a crop sensor camera, the image circle will be larger than the sensor, and so the projected image covers the image sensor. This simply means that only a part or the center portion of the projected image will be recorded by the sensor. This gives the effect of a more zoomed in or cropped in image, hence the term crop sensor. Makes sense, right? The camera's sensor size also affects the field of view of the lens. This is represented by the crop factor. The equivalent focal length is found by multiplying the focal length of the lens by the camera's crop factor. Now, different manufacturers have different crop factors. So for example, crop sensor cameras from Canon have a crop factor of 1.6 times, while those from Sony have a 1.5 times crop. Additionally, Micro Four Thirds cameras have a crop factor of 2 times, and cameras with a 1-inch sensor have a crop factor of 2.7 times. This crop factor is used to calculate the effective focal length of the lens when it is used on a crop sensor camera. So for example, a 50mm lens on a Canon crop sensor camera will effectively give you a focal length of 80mm and 75mm on a Sony crop sensor camera. So, although the focal length is the same, the field of view is different due to the sensor size. Another important factor to consider when buying a lens is its aperture. Like I mentioned briefly in my photography basics video, you can check that out up here. The aperture is the circular opening inside your lens that determines how much light goes through the lens and onto your camera's sensor. Lenses with wider maximum apertures are usually preferred, since they allow you to shoot in low light conditions as well as to shoot with faster shutter speeds when shooting fast moving subjects. Another feature of the lens's aperture is the ability to produce shallow depth of field, or autofocus backgrounds, or bokeh. Cheaper zoom lenses, like your kit lens, tend to be slow, meaning that they don't allow as much light to pass through and hence require a slower shutter speed to create a proper exposure. They typically have a variable maximum aperture, for example f3.5 to 5.6. This means that at the wider end of the zoom range, the maximum aperture is at its widest. But when you zoom out to the longest end of the lens, the maximum aperture is stopped down to the higher number. This can affect your exposure, as you will need to compensate for the difference in available light when zooming. More expensive zoom lenses have a fixed aperture throughout the entire zoom range. So for example, the 24 to 70mm f2.8 or the ever popular 24 to 105 f4. Now, quick point. Most manufacturers make different versions of lenses for different budgets. So for example, Canon currently makes 3 versions of their 50mm lens: the f1.8 version, the f1.4 version, and the f1.2 version. They have also made the 50mm in a f2.5 macro version and also a rare f1.0 version. And if you're lucky, you can find a vintage version that is f0.95. f0.95. That's crazy. Another example is that you can find zoom lenses in the same focal range in different apertures. There is the more expensive 24 to 70 f2.8 and the less expensive f4 version. Another important factor to consider when deciding on which lens to purchase is the autofocus capabilities. The speed and accuracy of the autofocus of the lens is crucial in ensuring that you nail your shot every time. Most modern cameras, both the DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, have excellent autofocus systems. However, if the autofocus motor in the lens is slow and inaccurate, then you will miss focus and you will miss your shot. The Sigma Art series lenses are fantastic. They have excellent build quality and superior optical performance. But they are known to have autofocus issues. They are notorious for missing focus, especially at wide open apertures. Another example of a slow autofocusing lens is the Canon 85 f1.2 L version 2 lens. This is a beautiful lens for portraits, as its wide open aperture at f1.2 lets you create beautiful autofocus backgrounds. However, the autofocus is painfully slow. This is not a lens to choose if you're looking to shoot fast moving subjects. Another factor you may want to consider when purchasing a lens is image stabilization. Now, the benefit of having a lens with image stabilization is that you can prevent motion blur and camera shake when shooting handheld at slower shutter speeds. This gives you a sharper image and make the lens more effective in low light conditions. This may also be useful to you if you plan to shoot video. Image stabilization is sometimes harder to find on higher quality lenses, since they let in more light and allow for faster shutter speeds. I personally find that lower priced zoom lenses tend to have image stabilization built in to compensate for their slow apertures. If this is important to you, check the lens to see if the lens has image stabilization. There should be a physical switch on the lens or markings of either IS on Canon for image stabilization, VR on Nikon for vibration reduction, VC on Tamron lenses for vibration compensation, or OS, optical stabilization, on Sigma lenses. Sony lenses have OSS or optical steady shot. However, you have to turn this on from inside the camera's menu system. Now, as with everything, you are only limited by your budget. You have to consider how much you're willing to spend on a lens. This will narrow down your choices if you have a small budget. However, if cost is not a factor, then the possibilities are endless. So, given all those factors, let's break down your options based on your specific needs. If you're using a crop sensor camera and looking to shoot wider than your 18 to 55 kit lens will allow you, and you want the flexibility of a zoom lens, then I recommend a lens in the range of 8 to 24mm. Canon makes a 10 to 18mm and a 10 to 22mm. Sony has a 10 to 18mm, and Fuji and Nikon makes a 10 to 24mm. Sigma makes a 10 to 20mm. This will take you into the ultra wide side of the spectrum and open up a wide new world of possibilities. Pun intended again. If you're using a full frame camera and want to dive into ultra wide, then you want to choose a lens in the 11 to 40mm range. Canon makes a 17 to 40mm f4 as well as a 16 to 35mm f4. There is also the more expensive 16 to 35 f2.8 or even the 11 to 24 f4 if your budget will allow it. If you want a wide prime lens that will give you more light gathering capabilities, then you may want to look into a 16mm on a crop sensor or a 20mm on a full frame. If you want to go even wider and budget is not a factor, then there is the 14mm lens. If you are looking for something longer than your kit lens will allow and you prefer zooms, then I would recommend a 55 to 200 to complement your kit lens to cover the telephoto end. You may also consider an all-in-one zoom lens that cover everything from wide to telephoto. Examples of these include the 18 to 135mm, or the 18 to 200mm, or even the 18 to 300mm. There is also a 28 to 300mm. These are extremely useful if you only want one lens. This eliminates the need for lens changing and is very convenient. Now, if you are limited by the speed of the lens, then you should look into getting a faster 70 to 200 f2.8 lens. If you are more into primes, then a 50mm f1.8 is a must-have. In fact, I recommend this as the next lens to buy after your kit lens. This lens is cheap and optically sharper, lighter, smaller, and have a larger maximum aperture than any zoom lens you can buy. If you still need a longer prime lens, then I recommend the 85mm f1.8 lens. If you have the budget, then by all means get the more expensive f1.4 or f1.2 versions. These standard and medium telephoto lenses are ideal if you are shooting portraits, events, or even weddings. If you're looking to focus very closely at tiny objects like insects or flowers, but you are again limited by your kit lens, then you may need to consider a specialty macro lens. Macro lenses have a very small minimum focusing distance, which means you can get really close. Macro lenses come in a variety of focal lengths from wide to medium telephoto. You have to decide which one is best for you. And since these lenses are specialty lenses, I don't recommend buying them until you have acquired the most essential lenses first. Instead, you can choose a standard lens that allows you to focus relatively close, or you can buy cheap macro extension tubes that essentially creates distance between your lens and the sensor and thus changes its minimum focusing distance and magnifies the image onto the sensor. Remember, lenses are the most important pieces of equipment you will invest in. While it may not be financially feasible to buy the best versions of all the lenses you need, I recommend investing in at least one high quality lens. Lenses tend to keep their value over time, so you can always sell them back and upgrade them in the future. If you can, I also recommend renting and testing them before you buy them. If your budget is limited, you can choose to buy cheaper versions or third-party options. You may even choose to buy used. If you do decide to go used, make sure it's from a trusted and reputable seller and you do all the necessary checks and inspections before making the commitment to buy. We all have different opinions on which lens is best for different situations. At the end of the day, it all boils down to personal preference. The best way to go about finding the right lens for you is to try them out for yourself. See which lens works best for your needs or for the mood or effect that you're trying to achieve in your photos and videos. Finding the right gear for you is really a matter of trial and error. Once you figure out exactly what will satisfy your needs, you should be able to confidently make your decision to ensure that your next lens purchase will be the right one. So guys, that's all I have for you today. If you have made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. I hope the information has been useful and provided some clarity and guidance in what to look for when buying your next lens. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. If there are any topics you would like to see me cover, you can also mention those in the comments as well. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel to see more content from me in the future. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace and one love.